You know, lately, I've been thinking a lot about crossovers in video games. In particular, when it comes to how they've been pulled off over the years and changed alongside what truly makes a good video game crossover and what makes a bad one. What originally sparked this topic was with the announcement that Sonic Racing Crossworlds like All Stars Racing Transformed was going to bring back crossover characters which were absent in 2019's Team Sonic Racing. Originally, I was really amazed by this news. It's looking like they're celebrating the more modern image of Sega this time around with reps from Persona and the Like a Dragon series. On top of that, there's also the welcome addition of Hatsune Miku, which whilst not being a Sega owned character, when it comes to her rhythm game series with the Project Eva title, Sega has been the one developing those since the very beginning. So even though she doesn't technically originate from gaming, her presence in the roster walks a fine line between fitting tonally with the rest of the cast whilst also being an out there surprise. You can tell a lot of care and thought went into her inclusion because of this. Afterwards, they teased some Minecraft stuff which also looked great alongside this Smash Fighter Pass inspired image, building up hype towards who could possibly be added next. Could this be the fabled Smash card that many enthusiasts, including myself, have been wanting all these years? I was very invested at this point. The hype train was off to a great start as I eagerly awaited which characters and roles would be added next.
Oh my god!
Yeah, so this is the fastest nosedive my hype levels have ever taken when looking forward to a game. Like, why is SpongeBob here? Did they already run out of ideas on who to add next? Not only that, but after the announcement we found out that the next two reps are going to be taken from Nickelodeon series. It might be a hot take, but this decision is just awful in my opinion, and outside of money and relevancy, I can't understand why this came to be in the first place. What does Sega and Nickelodeon even have in common anyway? It really feels like they want to be Fortnite with this roster and less like the Smash Bros series, which is what the whole All-Star Racing titles were in the first place. You know, a celebration of Sega for all ages of its history. So needless to say, this is what sparked the material for this video. But to truly understand why these decisions are questionable and pretty bad in the first place, let's take a look back to where video game crossovers first began and what made them so special to begin with.
X-Men vs. Street Fighter!
X-Men vs Street Fighter really needs no introduction at this point. It was the predecessor to what will become Marvel vs Capcom just a few years later after its release. It might not have technically been the first video game crossover if you count Japanese only titles, but it was the first to truly take off and would inspire many other titles afterwards. Anyway, on a critical reception level, even outside the scene of Spider-Man fighting against Mega Man or Ryu against Wolverine, they were respectable and invented the tag team fighting game format that you would see in titles like Dragon Ball FighterZ and the ironic up and coming Marvel Tokon game. That's a story for another day, by the way. Regardless, what mattered most about these titles is that they were just great games by default, and whilst back in the day they might have seemed a bit out there to some gaming audiences, it all surprisingly made sense. Marvel is known for creating many well established one-off heroes who would already have movesets you could imagine on the comic book side of things back in 1998, and Capcom is pretty much the same when it came to its rich lineup of series on the gaming side of things. Combine the two and take both Eastern and Western influences and you have a surprisingly good crossover that was a huge success back when it released. What this also led to was a healthy roster that would represent your mainstays like Ryu, Mega Man, Spider-Man and Wolverine. But because of its well-known lineage or demarketing the title itself, this allowed for lesser well-known characters to be included in the roster with a diverse amount of series to choose from. These more niche characters will be examples like Morrigan representing Darkstalkers or Shun Magora, which is a character I'd have no idea existed if it wasn't for these games. Cool design by the way. A lot of my fun with these games is just seeing characters like Phoenix Wright or Tron Bonne fighting alongside Spider-Man and Deadpool. There was just something about the contrast between seeing multi-million-dollar grossing blockbuster icons next to visual novel lawyer man that is just a charm that can't be put into words. It really speaks for itself. Needless to say that back during the heyday of these games, it signified a very powerful crossover combination that had limitless potential with the amount of characters they could add, and is an interesting footnote from both companies' histories. The winning formula wasn't just throwing well-known characters against one another, but also carefully considering who to adapt into this gameplay style instead of just adding say Michael Jackson because he was popular during the 90s for example. After that of course you had Super Smash Bros, which started off fairly straightforward, but then with Brawl you had third parties showing up, and before you know it you had a roster that looked like this, representing series both big and small. Sure, maybe not all characters belong here, but Smash really was and still is to this day the red carpet of gaming, and any icon worth its weight in history for the most part is represented here with no cheap multimedia attempt at relevance there to be seen in sight. The character representation that you see in this roster will stay relevant until the end of time. for the most part. Even outside of more mainstream examples, there are still plenty of crossover games out there, both big and small, that understand what they're doing and implement multiple series in a way that feels well thought out and interesting. To me, the best kinds of crossovers are the ones that make sense in their respective communities. For instance, if you're a visual novel and puzzle game fan, you might remember the excellent Professor Layton vs Phoenix Wright, proving that even two series outside from one another can come together to create a narrative that doesn't feel jarring from their own universes. I haven't played this game in over 9 years, but I could easily still tell you the story to it. It's that memorable and is easily a game that's well worth playing for any fan of the two series. Another really creative crossover, and one that really needs no introduction at this point, is how they added Link into Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube. As a game that was multi-platform, they couldn't just have the hero of Hyrule on the PlayStation 2, so they instead chose Hayaki from Tekken, which was a series known for being on PlayStation, and for the Xbox version they went with Spawn. No idea they didn't go with Master Chief instead, but whatever. But anyway, you can tell an effort was made here to represent each console with the crossovers used, outside of Spawn, but maybe they implemented him because he was a Western comic book character and Xbox was a Western made console. Moving on, even more great examples of crossover synergy is how they added Mai and Terry from Fatal Fury into Street Fighter 6. From a series that's always been pretty strict when it comes to its crossover representation in its roster, they carefully chose reps based on how they would already resonate within their own communities by choosing classic fighting game characters. Seeing their moveset transition from Fatal Fury into Street Fighter further adds to the enjoyment of seeing them implemented into the game, which further adds some more depth to their inclusion instead of it being merely surface level picks that you see in some other fighting games out there. Even smaller scale acknowledgements to other series can feel appreciated when it comes to crossovers between series. They don't have to be as big as adding an entire character from one game into another. JRPGs do this all the time, like with how Cosmos from Xenosaga is referenced in Tales of Vesperia, or how Asbel from Greatest F is being referenced in Atelier Yumiya. Also, if we're on the topic of outfit crossovers, who could forget the iconic Professor Edgeworth outfit in Among Us? Now, I might sound a bit sarcastic with this one, but even outside of the humour, you have to admit that the murder mystery angle here makes a lot of sense. There's also that time in Investigation 2 where they say the word sus. I'm just saying, this was a pretty big moment in crossover history if you ask me. Anyway, so far in this video I've cherry picked examples of good video game crossovers, the ones that made sense and were carefully considered to be collaborated with one another. But to better understand this topic, we also need to take a look at what makes a bad crossover. Whilst there might be some level of subjective opinion here, I do feel like there was a clear line to observe where the heart and soul of crossovers in gaming started to die and become more of a social media popularity contest in an attempt to stay relevant or possibly gain success over what was popular at the time. You could argue to some degree that gacha games fueled this trend, but in all honesty for the most part they are pretty harmless when it comes to affecting gaming as a whole. Of course, I've made it no secret so far in this video, I'm more referring to Fortnite or the Fortnitification of video game crossovers in the modern day. Releasing back in 2017, one of the biggest gaming franchises ever on a financial level became as big as it did through becoming a multimedia giant with a sickly amount of crossover content, proving that no form of media was outside of its midst when it came to its ever presence of wanting to stay relevant in pop culture. Like seriously, this trend should have died off alongside fidget spinners back when it did. But Epic Games has continued to keep this game alive as a service through its use of crossovers, alongside also just stealing from whatever series was big at the time in an attempt to further stay relevant when it came to its game modes. Here lies a very specific point in the history of gaming crossovers where things started to take a turn for the worst. Rather than taking pre-existing series and fitting them together in ways that made sense that were unique and creative, instead you could just see whatever's trending on social media and soullessly throw money at it to draw people in. After the ginormous success of Fortnite, you saw series like Call of Duty, Overwatch 2, I hate this game by the way, or Dead by Daylight also cash in on this new soulless trend. Whilst we still had series like Smash Bros to draw an actual substantial hype, it wasn't going to be around forever, and this more surface level member-berry approach to shoehorning in something into a game was becoming more and more popular since it made a lot of money. This was also the beginning of where you started to see skins show up in every live service game out there, since they also made a lot of money. Now, why not just throw a bunch of mainstream anime onto our characters that look nothing like them and make them cost the same as buying 3 high quality indie games and maybe even a pizza to go along with it? You know, value is subjective, but owning this stuff, and I'm using quotation marks by the way since it is digital and live service, is just embarrassing. Once a company gets big enough, they can pretty much do anything they want with their money. But therein lies the moral dilemma here. How come equally successful studios like Nintendo and in some instances Capcom don't cash in on this trend, whereas Epic Games with Fortnite has basically created a monopoly over this idea? This, in my opinion, is where I have respect for some of these other developers and where Sega has kinda disappointed me with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. They started off strong, and the Sonic Racing games have always originally been about celebrating Sega's history both big and small, with them putting their mascot at the forefront. But it's looking like with this new era of crossover culture with Fortnite, it seems like they're steering their new title in that direction with how they're going about adding characters. Look at it this way, Vice from Skies of Arcadia is a niche but beloved character from the Dreamcast era. Putting SpongeBob in over him just feels wrong, and communicates to some degree that Sega doesn't really care about its history of IPs anymore that isn't Sonic or the ones that make a ton of money like Persona or Like a Dragon. What made crossovers like Marvel vs Capcom or Smash Bros so good in my eyes is how they also represented smaller characters in their rosters. If you want to make the argument here, well, it's just to make money, that's a point you can make. But from a fan's perspective, or even someone who just enjoys seeing gaming celebrated as a whole, this just feels wrong. There has been crossovers that have been hugely successful both financially and critically, which took the more creative approach when it came to fusing together with other IPs to create something more than the sum of its original parts. Sure, we're also getting Minecraft, but that once again feels relevant despite Sega not being included with the brand, since it's part of gaming and is not just pop culture or nostalgia bait. I just feel like Sega is better than this. After all, they have so many characters to take from, both old and new. They don't need SpongeBob or Nickelodeon. In many ways, I agree with Sakurai's crossover rule of never adding characters outside the gaming, since you can quickly develop into this issue where you can just throw anything into a game with no rhyme or reason. In conclusion, what makes a good crossover game is that developers put thought and passion into who they are collaborating with without it coming off as tone deaf and soulless. Capcom didn't put Skibidi Toilet into Street Fighter 6 in an attempt to stay current, and instead chose characters like Mai and Terra since they are iconic fighting game characters that would resonate well with both fanbases and would allow players to see these characters' moves in a Street Fighter entry, alongside the fact that it also tied together nicely with the next Fatal Fury game that was releasing soon afterwards. When they put SpongeBob and other Nickelodeon reps into Cross Worlds, it's more of a soulless marketing stunt and less because seeing these two series together would make sense in any way. I've managed to completely exhaust this topic in this video, but now I'm curious, do you care at all about how Sega is going about crossovers with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, or are you hyped about it regardless? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Also, any feedback on this video will be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.